Hi there, everybody. Thank you for having us. We are Rainbow Harmony Project, and we are and have been Winnipeg's 2S LGBTQIA+ choir for over 25 years. We strive to create a safe space for queer people and allies to make music together, build meaningful connections, and inspire social change. The first piece we'll be performing is called Courage to Be Who We Are. It is sung in the memory of Gwen Araujo, a trans teenager who was murdered in America in 2002. She chose the name Gwen after her favorite musician, Gwen Stefani. The words of this piece are, "We are here in the memory of those who have fallen, here for the courage to be who we are."
We are here in the memory of those who have fallen, those who have fallen, those who have fallen. We are here in the memory of those who have fallen, here for the courage to be who we are, courage to be who we are. We are standing in the memory of those who have fallen, those who have fallen, those who have fallen. We are standing in the memory of those who have fallen, standing for the courage to be who we are, courage to be who we are. We are singing in the memory of those who have fallen, those who have fallen, those who have fallen. We are singing in the memory of those who have fallen, singing for the courage to be who we are, courage to be who we are. Courage to be who we are.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the Canadian Museum for Human Rights for inviting us to sing at this really important event for this very important exhibition about something that many of us didn't know very much about. And I know many members of the choir are looking forward to going through the exhibit and honoring those who came before us. Our next piece is called Lead with Love by the American composer Melanie DeMore. And I'll just read a little bit. She wrote this song in 2015, shortly after Donald Trump was elected for the first time, and people were feeling a sense of despair and not sure what to do. And she writes, Lead with Love was written in answer to a call for connection in troubled times. It is about persistence, community, and moving ahead. One foot in front of the other is a metaphor for determination and forward motion. I think of love warriors like Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, Gandhi, Dolores Huerta. All of them started their movements out of the love of their people, not out of the hatred of someone else. And I think that that is what we all need in these times. I welcome you to join us in singing the chorus if you like. The words are, you gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. You
gotta put one put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Don't give up hope. Don't give up hope. You're not alone. You're not alone. Don't you give up. Don't you give up. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Put one foot in front of the other and lead with love. Lift up your eyes. Lift up your eyes. Don't you despair. Don't you despair. Look up ahead. Look up ahead. The path is there. The path is there. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and front of the other one. One foot in front of the other and lead with love. You gotta put one foot in front of the other and front of the other one. One foot in front of the other and lead with love. I know you're scared. I know that you're scared. And I'm scared too. But here I am. But here I am. Right next to you. Right next to you. We gotta put one foot in front of the other and front of the other one. One foot in front of the other and lead with love. We gotta put one foot in front of the other and front of the other one. One foot in front of the other and lead with love. And lead with love. And lead with love. And lead with love.
Okay, let's show our appreciation one more time for the Rainbow Harmony Project Choir. So good evening. I'm Daryl Nadeau, Vice President of Visitor Experience, and on behalf of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, it is my privilege to be your MC tonight. Bonsoir, je m'appelle Darrell Nadeau, je suis vice-président de l'expérience de visite ici au musée. Il me fait plaisir de vous souhaiter la bienvenue et d'être votre maître de cérémonie ce soir. We're gathered here for the launch of Love in a Dangerous Time, Canada's LGBT Purge, l'exposition Amour caché, la purge LGBT au Canada. Are you excited? Now, if you have not had the chance yet to take in the exhibition, it will be open throughout this evening and will remain on display for the next year. It tells the story of one of the largest scale workplace violations in human rights in Canadian history, the LGBT Purge, and introduces many people whose courage and perseverance brought an end to this dark chapter and helped spark a movement to protect human rights for all Canadians. We're honored here to be joined tonight by many of those courageous advocates who will be coming in just a few seconds from now. So we're going to have a procession shortly led by Museum CEO Aisha Khan and Elder Albert McLeod. And we'll also have Martine Roy and Todd Ross, co-chairs of the LGBT Purge Fund board, along with Purge survivors who joined us from across Canada. We're grateful also for the command brass of the Royal Canadian Air Force Band, who are here to welcome them in the room. Thank you so much. We would not be here tonight were it not for your incredible courage and determination, dear survivors. We're so glad that you're here with us and so honored that you have trusted us and partnered with us to bring your stories to Canadians. We also want to take a moment to remember those who are not able to join us and those who did not live long enough to receive compensation or to hear an apology from the Government of Canada, but for whom this exhibition serves as a memorial and a legacy. Let's take a moment of silence to remember them. Thank you. You may now be seated, and the survivors will also take their seats. Let's give them one last round of applause, please. Now, we're all very grateful for those of you who are able to make it here to celebrate this night. We gather here on Treaty 1 territory at the crossroads of the Red and Assiniboine Rivers in a historic gathering place for the Anishinaabe, the Ininewak, the Dakota Oyate, and the Dene Soulan. Ce territoire est également le berceau et la patrie du peuple métis de la Rivière-Rouge. The water in the museum is sourced from Shoal Lake and has been cared for by First Nations in Treaty 3 territory for thousands of years. This acknowledgement is a starting point for honoring the land and water that gives us life, embracing our responsibility as truth tellers and stewards of the collective memory of Canada, acknowledging the ongoing impacts of colonization, and contributing to reconciliation. Tonight, we're fortunate to have the chance to meet some Purge survivors and allies who are going to share their stories and thoughts. In particular, we want to recognize members of the LGBT Purge Fund Board who are here and who have been honored to partner with the creation of Love in a Dangerous Time since its inception. We're also fortunate to have some distinguished guests. I'm honored to welcome Lieutenant General JPR Prevost, Chief of Professional Conduct and Culture for the Canadian Armed Forces, as well as Brigadier General James Hawthorne and many other members of the military. We're also honored to have RCMP Assistant Commissioner of D Division Scott Murchie and other representatives of the RCMP. We're also grateful to share the night with those representing the Federal Public Service and the Department of Justice. We also want to recognize elected officials that are here this evening, including MPs Leela Dance, Rachel Blaney, and Ben Carr. And representing the provincial government, we have MLAs Lisa Naylor, Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, MLA David Pankratz, who served as military liaison for the Government of Canada, MLA J.D. Devgan, MLA Logan Oxenham, and MLA Tyler Lejimadière. We want to acknowledge our gratitude for the support of our exhibition sponsors as well, Decium, Manitoba Liquor and Lotteries, and Uphouse Inc. And thank you to Little Brown Jug for providing complimentary beverages at our reception tonight. Sounds like some of you had one already. And I want to give an especially hearty welcome to the artists who are here this evening who contributed works to the exhibition, including Noam Gonick and the RWB dancers featured in the Regulation of Desire, and Laurie Millen and Shauna Dempsey, who created The Fruit Machine, a space opera. Finally, I want to thank the command brass from the RCAF band for lending ceremony to tonight's event. Merci au groupe Command Brass de la musique de l'aviation royale canadienne. Cet ensemble distingué de musiciens et musiciennes professionnels à temps plein fait partie intégrante des forces armées canadiennes et soutiennent des événements militaires et civils à l'échelle locale, nationale et internationale. The RCAF band is a key part of the Canadian Armed Forces, fostering national pride through the power of music, and they perform for ceremonial functions, government events, school concerts, and public outreach events like this one. They're now going to perform O Canada, so stand if you're able and join us in singing in your preferred language. Veuillez vous joindre à nous pour chanter l'hymne national dans la langue de votre choix. Merci beaucoup. Before we move into the larger panel discussion with LGBT Purge survivors and remarkable advocates and allies, I'm honored to call upon longtime voice for Indigenous rights and the rights of Two-Spirit people and other members of the 2S LGBTQI+ community. It's my pleasure to introduce Elder Albert McLeod to ground us in this place and in this discussion in a good way. Elder Albert?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Treaty 1 and the homeland of the Red River Métis. My ancestry comes from northern Manitoba, the Woodland Cree and the Swampy Cree, who participated in the Hudson Bay fur trade for over 250 years, as well as my Scottish ancestors who participated in the tail end of the fur trade the last 100 years from 1850 to 1950. I do come from the north, but I've lived in Winnipeg for 41 years, being welcomed by the Ojibwe people, who are the prominent Indigenous people in southern Manitoba and in this city. We have 102,000 Indigenous people in the city. As we are told before we do the business of humans, we acknowledge our ancestors, the power of nature, the natural world, the power of the spiritual world. As an Indigenous people, we had learned over thousands of years of being in North America that these were important to our continued survival in the Northern Hemisphere. My mentor, the late Roger Roulette, taught me about the Ojibwe philosophies, Bapiwin, survival and overcoming, and certainly tonight is about survival and overcoming discrimination, fear, trauma. And Roger said how that was accomplished was 4 ways. Facing our fears, real or imagined. And certainly in this political context in North America, there are many fears, real or imagined. And there are many people today who express love in a dangerous time. So, tonight is very important to remember there are many people across North America who are facing those fears, real or imagined. And in many ways, we can be that light tonight, that beacon in that darkness, in that uh, insecurity, to show what can be accomplished by a state, by a democracy, by free living people. So tonight is very important in that sense. The second way of survival, the observant study of events, and certainly with the purge survivors who fought back, advocated, stood up, and said what happened to them was wrong, morally, ethically, and spiritually wrong. And that is why we are here tonight, to do reparations. For that wrong. The third way that Roger said was deduction, and that is the exhibition here tonight. The artists, the writers, the designers that captured that history that goes back to the 1960s to the present, formulated it so that we could understand it cohesively as an experience of our fellow Canadians in dealing with the trauma of the human rights violations they experienced. That is the deduction. And finally is about tonight, how people achieved survival was by honoring and giving thanks. We forget about that. Even within the struggle, we take time to care for each other, to care for ourselves, sometimes to sing, to play music, to eat, celebrate time together within the struggle. And we honor those people who stood up and said no. We honor those survivors who didn't make it till tonight. And we celebrate with them because they have moved into a spiritual realm that we don't know much about, but certainly they were with us every step of the way of that fight. So in our tradition here in this territory, which is the Great Northern Plains, with the Ojibwe Plains people as well as the Cree Plains people, that we honor and call in those spirits through the lighting of our plant medicines. And in this vessel, I have sage and cedar. And those burning smoke is meant to travel into those dimensions and awaken those spirits that are meant to be with us tonight. So they can travel to be in this room with us, to see us and to hear us, and guide us if they can. Because tonight, for many people, it just may be the beginning of a journey where we need that support, we need that ingenuity, that epiphany of who we are in our journey forward. And those spirits who have been here for millennia and millions of years are much more powerful than we are. And so we do it with humility. And Marilyn, my friend here from the museum, is going to help. She will take the vessel around in a circle in the room. And that means that we are all purifying ourselves to show respect to those spirits that we called to be present with us tonight. We will never know what or who they were, but we understand they are benevolent to human beings. And that's why we call them, because we're the last creation, we're the most vulnerable creation, and that's why we rely on them in events like this. When we come together as community, as society, as nations, we rely not just on our own knowledge, but we rely beyond, and that is the tradition of Indigenous people, and has served the people here at the Forks for 6,000 years. The bison hunters who were here hunting bison 6,000 years ago, and they're still here. So I'm going to ask Marilyn to take it around. She's going to take it around the room on the periphery. And again, as I said, it's a demonstration of our respect of those powers beyond our conception, our belief, our ability to believe. One of them is the thunders, especially on the prairies here. We have great winds, and that is the name of the national monument, Thunderhead. Great energy moves here, and that's what we wanted to invest in the monument. And so in 2023, I think it was, or earlier, I woke up and I heard the thunders. It was our provincial election. And I knew that day we would have an Indigenous premier who would take a pipe who would take a sacred pipe into our legislative building, and it happened at 5 o'clock that afternoon, and the sun was shining. So the thunders are the beings that clear the way and prepare us for change, and hopefully tonight can be an impetus for change in North America. Closing, I'd like to ask Todd Ross to come up, and he'll talk about the eagle feather that was given to the Purge survivors.
Tonshi, Wabanakwat, Dishinakashon, Nia Mitchif. I'm a proud Red River Métis and pleased to be here tonight. Thank you so much, Albert, for inviting me up, and thank you for your words. I want to talk to you about these two feathers and the case that the feathers travel with. Albert talked about the connection to spirit and the spirits that have gone before us, the spirits that are with us. And we have eagle feathers to help us with that connection. The eagle is closest to spirit. And so when we have the eagle feathers, they help us to speak to spirit. And spirit world knows that we're speaking to it with these feathers. The first feather, Albert also mentioned Thunderhead. We had an Indigenous advisory group that came together to help us in the development of that project and to get the thoughts of the Two-Spirit people and the Indigiqueer people. And during that process, we were in Ottawa, and a Two-Spirit veteran, Lee Thomas, gifted us with this eagle feather. And so it's gifted to the LGBT Purge Fund, and I hold it for the LGBT Purge Fund for now. This feather won't be in a museum. It will continue its work, and it will be passed on because it has more work to do. Because of this feather, to be treated respectfully, I had asked my friend, Two-Spirit Michif woman, Benny Michaud, to create a case for it. And this case, just to describe it briefly, it has the three poppies representing several things in three. It represents the military, the RCMP, and the civil service. It also represents First Nation, Métis, and Inuit. Then there are blueberries, which represent those of us who made it through the purge. On each of the stems leading to the blueberries, there are short pieces representing those who had their careers cut short or those who did not make it. And then there are 4 bulbs, and these 4 bulbs represent the new life. It represents the ongoing work that is being done. So this case goes with these feathers. And when Benny returned the case to me, she also included this second eagle feather. And her comment was, it's a bit battered, but it still does good work. And I think that speaks to all of us purge survivors. So, merci.
So in closing, I'd like to show you this pipe, red pipestone from Pipestone National Monument in southern Minnesota. A colleague of mine, Doyle Robertson, has been digging there for 31 years to retrieve this red pipestone for Two-Spirit people in North America. Doyle has an uncle, and we called him Uncle Ollie. The true story of Uncle Ollie was that Uncle Ollie was gay Lakota man in the 1940s, a time when it was not okay to be gay or lesbian or transgender. But he went to fight in World War II, to fight the Nazis. And he was one of the liberators of concentration camps. When he came back to America, he came out as a gay man and went to Hollywood and lived as a gay man. And then he came home and looked after his aunt, who was in her 90s. Traditional role of a Lakota two-spirit person, a warrior and a caregiver. So I donated this to the Canadian Museum of Human Rights so that us to realize that that border is not our border. It's a political border. And tonight we think of our friends across that border. Right? So thank you.
I know I speak for all of us at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights when I say how proud we are to be presenting Love in a Dangerous Time, Canada's LGBT Purge.
Love in a Dangerous Time is the largest queer history and 2S LGBTQ+ rights exhibition ever held at a museum in Canada.
Tansei, bonjour, bonjour. Hi friends. Je m'appelle Matthew Cutler et je suis le vice-président d'exposition et responsable de conservation au musée.
And my name is Dr. Scott DeGroot. I'm the lead curator of the exhibition, and it's my pleasure to help bring all of the stories that the exhibition holds to life. Love in a Dangerous Time has an expansive historical scope and scale. It's true that the purge ended not so long ago. However, it goes further back in some ways than even the Cold War. If we look at the structures of homophobia and heteronormativity within Canadian history and society. The exhibition begins with Indigenous perspectives on gender and sexual diversity and two-spiritedness. It covers the laws and regulations from the 1600s on that impacted queer people in Canada and takes that story through the Cold War and the construction of queer folks as a national security threat. Oral history interviews with survivors, their allies, and prominent 2S LGBTQ+ community members are really at the heart and soul of this exhibition. For example, Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers explain the term Two-Spirit and its history in their own words. The voices of survivors fill the darkroom, a recreation of a space used to interrogate people about their sexuality. And an interactive video kiosk allows visitors to ask survivors and their allies questions about the purge with answers stemming from the interviews. Artwork really helps to bring the exhibition to life. 2 landmark artworks have been commissioned for Love in a Dangerous Time. The Fruit Machine by Shauna Dempsey and Laurie Milan is a short film that dismantles the government of Canada's absurd notion that homosexuality could be detected by scientific testing. And The Regulation of Desire by Noam Gonek, a collaboration with the Royal Winnipeg Ballet, presents key chapters of the purge's history through the bodies of dancers.
In the earliest days of the class action settlement, the museum was involved in negotiations by survivors who wanted to ensure their stories would be told. And as the settlement took shape, the Purge Fund became the stewards of those resources and this work. And so we've worked incredibly closely with the Purge Fund and with a group of advisors who've helped us to figure out exactly how to tell these stories and in what ways. At the heart of our work is the survivors' desire that these stories be heard and told to as many Canadians as possible. And we wanted to make these stories more accessible. And so we began last year by launching an exhibit in our Canadian Journeys Gallery that will endure for every visitor to this museum for years to come. And we built a pop-up of this exhibition, a smaller version that can visit non-traditional spaces, libraries, community spaces, military bases, and Legion halls. And then this exhibition, Love in a Dangerous Time, is the large-scale storytelling of the Purge that will be in our gallery for the next year, but we'll also have the opportunity to tour across the country. And so This exhibition has taught us what it means to take stories and to share them in multiple ways so that as many Canadians as possible can have an opportunity to experience them.
Love in a Dangerous Time is an exhibition by and for queer people. It is funded by a community-based class action settlement. It's been built by 2S LGBTQ+ creatives and indeed by a queer curator. It offers content that our community, particularly queer youth, need to know as clouds darken on the socio-political horizon. At issue is an abuse of power by our government, an invasion of Canadians' privacy, and the false construction of a national security threat. Queer people were not coerced into serving foreign powers on the basis of their sexual orientation. They did not suffer from a character weakness. In fact, queer Canadians were steadfast in their service to the Canadian military, RCMP, and civil service. What happened during the Purge should concern everyone, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. We must all be wary of such violations and false constructions of threats to national security. Yesterday it was queer folks. Who might be targeted tomorrow?
This exhibition owes its existence to the resilience of survivors. When they won their class action settlement, a portion of the funds were dedicated to bringing these stories to light.
Now, funds are important, but they're not sufficient for an exhibition. What has mattered most in terms of creating Love in a Dangerous Time are the relationships that we have built with survivors, and that is something that has meant a lot to all of us on the exhibition development team.
The survivors' vision for this content has really driven our exhibition development process, and we hope that their perseverance and their hope and their energy is well represented here, and we're honored to be able to stand as allies and friends and partners in the work of this exhibition and the entire project.
I'd like to say on behalf of myself and all of us here at the museum, thank you to the survivors for sharing your stories, for everything that you've contributed to making Love in a Dangerous Time possible, and ultimately for your courage and your activism, which dismantled the Purge and made Canada a better place.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. As you know, my name is Scott DeGroot, and I am the lead curator of Love in a Dangerous Time. It's sort of eerie and cool to follow myself. That's never happened before. The first thing that I want to say is simply that we did it. We created the first large-scale exhibition on queer history and rights ever held at a Canadian museum. And thank you, I agree, it's worth a round of applause. Developing an exhibition of this size goes beyond any single person or professional unit within the museum. I stand before you tonight with pride, a great deal of pride, but also humility and gratitude for the contributions that so many people have made to this project. For a while now, I've been asking myself a big question. What is an exhibition? A highly regarded source called Wikipedia tells me that it is an organized presentation and display of a selection of items. Okay, that's sort of true, but it's not the most compelling definition. People in my line of work often place narrative and storytelling at the conceptual core of what exhibitions are. And it's hard to argue with that. I think that, storytelling is key to what we do. But a different aspect of exhibitions has been on my mind lately. And it seems to me that they at once generate and heavily depend on what we might call a social interface. And indeed, exhibition development necessarily becomes a contact point
for people from very different walks of life with very different types of experience, expertise, creativity, technical skill, and technological acumen. Love in a Dangerous Time has been made possible by all sorts of connections between Purge survivors and their advocates, to us LGBTQ+ community members and leaders, scholars and researchers, from historians to social scientists, Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers, lawyers and public servants, artists and designers, and of course, curators and museum professionals. So this kind of a social interface can be unruly. There can be points of friction, disagreements emerge, there can be challenging communications. We've been through that, we know. But simultaneously, the kind of interface that I'm talking about fosters information and resource sharing, generative encounters between different perspectives, collaboration, co-creation, and new relationships and forms of trust. And now, as Love in a Dangerous Time is unveiled to the public, its social interface will only expand. The Purge's history will be encountered in many instances for the first time by a wide range of visitors. Content on 2S LGBTQ+ oppression and resistance will reach and perhaps surprise people from far-flung communities, professions, and walks of life. Purge survivors themselves may gain a fuller understanding of their own experiences when viewed in relation to the deep historical context offered by the exhibition. Perhaps youth will find lessons of strategic value for present struggles. There's so many possibilities that are exciting. And now I'm arriving at one of my greatest hopes for Love in a Dangerous Time. In the weeks and the months ahead, I hope that the exhibition's social interface becomes something more like a forum. And I hope that it sparks dialogue that cuts across boundaries of identity, affiliation, and age. I'm delighted to think that critical conversations on issues of national security, privacy rights, and normality might arise. I hope that the exhibition provides opportunities for queer youth to learn from and indeed converse with survivors. And my heart beams at the thought of people making and perhaps even debating connections between the history showcased in the exhibition and our current political moment, which Albert McLeod alluded to. We all know that there are very troubling comparisons between the targeting of queer folks during the Cold War and what is unfolding or potentially will unfold south of the border. And so I am hoping that within the conversations around Love in a Dangerous Time to come, that there could be some new to us LGBTQ+ community allies who are able to see things in a new way and to join with our community in the struggles ahead. Turning to acknowledgements, there are just so many people to thank. And I will apologize in advance for not being able to mention everyone by name. First and foremost, and thanks again to the Purge survivors who contributed their time, their stories, objects, keepsakes, and so much more. Thanks to the Exhibition Advisory Council members for their guidance and their dedication over the years. And to the museum's Two-Spirit Advisory Group and Elder Albert McLeod for their direction on Indigenous content. I'm really grateful to the LGBT Purge Fund, to the whole board of directors. In particular, I want to thank Michelle Douglas and Doug Elliott. I want to thank them for their warmth, knowledge, wisdom, and commitment to this project, and for always respecting curatorial autonomy. To Vice Presidents Matthew Cutler and Reva Harrison, thank you for devoting so much time and energy to this endeavor. Matt and Riva are a dynamic duo who have adroitly managed many high-level strategic matters that, to be perfectly honest, I often tuned out of, but I know they're important. Our interpretive planner, Dr. Robert Evans, deserves special mention. Yep. He shaped Love in a Dangerous Time in significant ways that went beyond his formal job description, his formal role. And Robert, I just want to say that you're one of the most knowledgeable, generous, and good-natured people I've ever worked with. I feel like our project manager, Natalie Fadar, saved the exhibition more times than I can count. I'll always admire her meticulous work, her warm heart, and her Newfoundland sensibilities. Thanks to Scott Gillum for wearing several leadership hats and for coming up with the exhibition title that got us out of a big jam. And to me, Love in a Dangerous Time feels just right. It feels perfect. So thank you for that, Scott. At one point, I thought that I could basically write and edit the exhibition text on my own, and I was completely wrong, kind of like Hindenburg level wrong. Paula Kelly was a marvelous editor. I call her the queen of pithy titles and subtitles. Corinne Baudet was a stellar translator, and her impact can be felt across the exhibition. Corinne, yes. Corinne, I promise I'll never call you fussy again. So I'm part of a very talented, accomplished, and supportive curatorial unit, and I'm very grateful to every single one of my curator colleagues. Isabella Masson, Julia Peristarakis, and Jeremy Marin co-curated some key sections of Love in a Dangerous Time. Travis Tomchuk tackled the catalog, Aaliyah Aluma facilitated the pop-up tour, and Felix Berry's influence pervades the Two-Spirit content. I'd like to thank Ingenium, the Canadian War Museum, Library and Archives Canada, the Archives with a Q in Toronto, Robin Metcalf, and all other lenders and partners. Hard work by the museum's collections team secured a really impressive array of objects and images for the exhibition. And Jenna Bereshchuk-Moda, Annika Harrison, and Stephanie Chilpisky come to mind as people who devoted countless hours. So many internal and external researchers worked on this project over the years, and there's too many of them to name in full. But I do want to give special thanks to Shane Wong and Haley Caldwell for their organizational excellence and their meticulous research that really enriched a lot of what we did. And also our educator in residence, Walter Cassidy, contributed great material, particularly on Ontario history. Finally, Sven Robinson provided us with a trove of historical documents related to the Purge, and he generously thematized and analyzed them for us, so thank you, Sven. Origin Studios in Ottawa came through with a marvelous exhibition design. And their work has been brought to life by our internal design and digital experience team. I'll give a shout out to Joel Gendron, Aaron Cohen, Annie Kierans, and Brody Sanderson. Thank you to all of the teams who tackled building and fabrication, technological elements, programming, marketing, and the catalog. There's just a huge group who's been all hands on deck with this exhibition project. I can't forget to thank Dr. David Churchill for sticking with the advisory council and for his steadfast mentorship and support to me over the years.
So that's almost it from me. I want to say thank you to my friends and family members who are here tonight. There's a lot of you. I feel super lucky really every day to be part of a big, complicated, loving network of people living right here in Winnipeg. My final acknowledgement is to my parents, Nancy McMillan and Fred DeGroot, who are here cheering me on tonight. I think that raising a queer kid in the 1980s and 90s in Winnipeg was tough. It was tough sometimes to be one. And homophobia abounded. Understandings of gender and sexual diversity were minimal. But my parents always loved and supported me unconditionally. They tried their best to protect me from the cruelty and the bigotry of the world. And I wish that all 2S LGBTQ plus kids could have parents and families as loving and supportive as mine. So with that said, let's work together to protect queer and trans youth and to build a better world for them. And thank you all so much for being here. Let's get on with the program.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion. We decided to put together a fireside chat so we could cover a bunch of different ground because this story has so many layers, so many decades, so many survivors and others fighting for change. My name is Reva Harrison. I am the Vice President of Education and Public Affairs here at the museum, and it is my profound honor to moderate this panel of some of our key allies and supporters and partners in this project. And for me, one of my roles over the last 4 years has been as co-chair of the Purge Advisory Council that Dr. DeGroot mentioned. And doing that work with this group and our distinguished survivors and others who are here tonight has been the honor of a lifetime. And so with that, I would love to kick us off. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the moments in history that brought us here. And Michelle, we're going to start with introducing the panel, your role. You got the whole thing going when you were a young officer in the armed forces. You were fired for being a lesbian, and you decided to fight back, and it led to the change in policy and got the whole ball rolling. Welcome to the panel tonight. Doug Elliott. Doug Elliott, a distinguished lawyer, partner of Cambridge LLP, still fighting the good fight for human rights, led the legal team that won the class action lawsuit in 2017, and led to the apology, the settlement, the mandate for today's exhibit. Welcome, Doug. Martine Waugh, one of the co-chairs of the Purge Fund Board, as we heard earlier, and a survivor, one of a few survivors who were able to put their names to the class action lawsuit and agitated for change for many, many decades. Welcome, Martine. And Sven Robinson, Canada's first openly gay MP, Member of Parliament for British Columbia, a supporter of survivors, and a champion for rights, for human rights for so long. Welcome to our panel. And my colleague and coworker, Michaela Crichton, one of the co-founders of the Rainbow Equity Council here at the museum, a recent winner of a Changemaker Award for Pride at Work Canada. Thank you for joining us here today. All right, folks, let's dive in with a little bit of history and tap into some of your experiences, getting a little bit of feedback here. Michelle, you were so young when you made that big decision to take the federal government to court. one of the most powerful employers in the land, if not the most powerful. You've called it your Goldilocks moment when we've talked. Tell us what were some of the things that came together for that Goldilocks moment to transpire.
Well, thank you. What an honor it is to be here and with so many of my heroes. I acknowledge all the Purge survivors that are here. Reva, what an honor. Yeah, I was a very young woman striving to find my place, not sure what to do, but I kind of followed in the family business, which was public service. And I joined the military, and I had this beautiful experience of starting to fit in, which I didn't always at university or high school. And I also fell in love for the first time with a fellow officer. She was lovely, but it did put me directly into conflict with the military's policy at the time. For reference, this is 1986 when I joined. And I encountered the policy in my first job as a military police officer, something I was very proud to do. And one day, my boss came to see me and he said, "Come with me, we're conducting an important investigation. We're to fly out tonight to Ottawa." So away we went out to the airport, and I ended up in a hotel room out by the airport strip, encountered interrogation for the first time, something that stays with me today. I know many here will understand that. And, ultimately after interrogations, denials on my part, I eventually, although I had this promising military career, top of my class, I was fired with the words "not advantageously employable" due to homosexuality on my release documents. And I was in shock and shame, fog from being fired. And the military police said, "You have 24 hours to come out to your family or we'll send the police to do it." I came out to my family, who just have been rocks for me in my life. So grateful to them. And then I had this encounter with Sven Robinson at a university, and I told him I was in trouble and needed help. And I gave him my name. He never forgot it. He went away and found me because I was too nervous to call a member of parliament. And eventually he found me. He helped me get a lawyer, Clayton Ruby, Harriet Sachs, who took on the case. I'm 61 years old today, so this is an ancient history. But they helped me, and it just goes to show that when you gather your people, they will help you. And I've always been grateful to Sven, but that's the story of how I decided to launch a lawsuit. Clayton Ruby asked me, "Is it yes or no? Will you go ahead?" And somehow I did say yes. But I'd like to also say, even though that may have been a moment for a lawsuit to start, I know I'm not the first. I know others who didn't have the Constitution. 1986, we had the protection of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We didn't have those protections for others. So it was a very special Goldilocks moment. The right people, the right time, the right case. And that's how it happened for me.
Thank you, Michelle. Doug, I've come to know you not just as the lawyer I want fighting any case I ever have for me, but also as an incredible history buff. And your eyes light up a little bit when you talk about lots of history things. And one of the things I want to talk about with you is you have a way of talking about this moment in time where millions and millions of taxpayers' dollars were wasted on what you've called the most unsuccessful, basically, initiative in Canadian government history, was an attempt to surveil, harass, persecute people for just being queer. And tell us a little bit about what was going on at that time that allowed this egregious expenditure of taxpayers' dollars and it was okay. It went on for decades.
It did. Assistant Commissioner McMurtry, please pay close attention. Okay, so in 1945, Igor Gouzenko walks out of the Soviet embassy and reveals to Canadians and Americans that there are Soviet spies everywhere, even in the House of Commons, Fred Rose. And there was this social panic about communists everywhere. And the fact that you couldn't tell a communist by looking at him, and that some guy you trusted might be a spy. Well, then later in the 1940s, Kinsey does his report, and people used to think that homosexuals were very unusual. Now suddenly he's telling them that 10% of the population are queer, and everyone's saying, oh my God, I was worried about the communists. Now the queers are everywhere. What am I going to do? I thought I could spot one a mile away. He might be sitting right next to me. And then those two things converged in 1950. And we had a Republican administration coming in on the heels of a Democratic administration, and they wanted to show that they were going to be tough on national security and that the Democrats were corrupt and immoral and that they didn't care about the United States, but the Republicans did. And so they concocted this theory that somehow queers were communists. And all communists were queers, and all queers were communists. And even the queers who weren't communists would be susceptible to blackmail because, you see, we are such weak people that we could be blackmailed by the Soviet Union, and we would sell out our country at the drop of a hat to protect ourselves. That was the working hypothesis for this police investigation, that our national security, the national security of the United States, was under threat by queer spies. And so this witch hunt began to find the queer spies. And they looked for queer spies for 40 years. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars looking for queer spies. How many queer spies did they find? None, not one in 40 years. And no one challenged this hypothesis. Why? Because, well, everyone knows. It's common sense. We don't need proof. We don't need evidence. I can rely on my common sense that queers are going to be blackmailed and they're all spies. And eventually it took a lawsuit to bring this egregious waste of taxpayers' dollars. I understand they at one time had a whole floor at RCMP headquarters in Ottawa dedicated to this. They were surveilling 30,000 Canadians because they wanted to try and spot the homosexuals before they even applied to the government. So they would interview a drag queen and say, please give us the names of the queers that you know, because we want to find out if any of them are working for the government. It was a ridiculous witch hunt, the most embarrassing police investigation, the longest running, most expensive, and least successful investigation in the history of Canadian policing. My father was a police officer. My grandfather was a police officer. When they conducted an investigation, if you didn't find a suspect within a couple of months, a year or two, that was the end of it. This went on forever. And I tell you folks, this premise, this lie, that queer people were unfit to serve, even though these people, I'm telling you, the people in the Purge Survivor Group, they're the most magnificent Canadians you'd want to meet. You know, this woman has the Order of Canada. We shot ourselves in the foot by firing these people. We got rid of some of the best civil servants we had, and we replaced them with a bunch of mediocre white frat boys who got their jobs because they were straight white men. So we harmed these people's lives, but we harmed our country too.
Thank you, Doug. I felt that question would get you going.
One man's opinion.
Martin, as one of the proponents of the class action lawsuit, sometimes, this story, one of the complexities to tell it is the fact that there were two very important lawsuits. A first lawsuit that allowed us to see the end of a policy, but a second lawsuit that sought that redress and that justice for so many survivors, including yourself. Your story has always fascinated me because you were also very young in your service when you were discharged. You have openly talked about how you weren't even sure that this career was for you. You questioned whether you wanted to stay. But being discharged like that led you to what you talked about. We talked about the other day when we were in the exhibit, 30 years of pursuing justice, and you just couldn't let it go. Why couldn't you let it go?
No, I could not let it go, and that's really pour nos amis français ce soir. Bonsoir.
Wow.
And everybody's gonna know if you know somebody from Quebec or from Montreal, we don't let go. We're very persistent. But for me, it was more a question of logic. I could not grasp the idea that I was let go for being an homosexual. It didn't make sense for me. That my sexual orientation was changing something with my competency, with my skills. And after they let me go, it took me a while to get myself back together because for me it was like a parallel world. Like, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. My own government did that. And my father was at National Femme Board, and it was his boss in the same time that was doing that. So for me, all my life, I was like, oh my God, after Michelle won, I was like, they're gonna come and knock at my door. They're gonna say, we're sorry, come back, something. Nothing. And when you were talking about it with people, they were saying, oh yeah, but that's the past. And I'm like, wait a second, that destroyed many lives. That has an impact on maybe my spirituality, but that had a bad energy in the world. And we could not leave people with that sorrow and that thought that they were in shame. And for me, that was really like, how can we change that? How can we make people understand that was a mistake? That should never happen, and that you're all good people, and that you merit respect. And it went bigger than that to a certain point because nobody knew about it. That was the worst. Is you were talking about that, and people were looking at you like, where are you coming from with this? That's impossible. So it took meeting Douglas Elliott to say it's possible. And all those years, I was looking for a Douglas Elliott that would gamble and would say, you're right. They did that to way too many people. And that is not right. And we cannot go on and act as if everything is right until we deal with that and we apologize, we redress, and today we educate and sensibilize. Sir.
Sven, you came on the scene really involved in some of the experiences of survivors even before you met Michelle. You were a member of parliament, you were involved in all-party committee discussions about amending the Canada Human Rights Act, and these stories started to come to light. You started to hear from others, some of the survivors who are here today. You started to hear their stories of their experiences, and you started to realize that there was a bigger story here that needed to be told and uncovered. And interesting, there you were, member of parliament, not in government. This is hard to bring about change from within a political system. How important was it to rely on relationships, Parliament Hill, relationships with elected officials from other political parties? How important was it to do that work behind the scenes?
Well, thanks for the question, Riva, and what a privilege it is to be here this evening to share a platform with these amazing people and to honor the survivors who are here tonight. Thank you for this privilege. Great question, actually, Riva. And it was incredibly important to build those relationships and to work within a framework in which you recognized who are the people that might be able to make the change and where were the forces of resistance. I was a kid when I was first elected. I was the youngest member of the House. And early on, I had the privilege of serving on the Constitution Committee, the committee that wrote the Charter. And I tried to get sexual orientation included explicitly in the Charter. In fact, it was a Manitoba MP named Jacob who led the force against that, saying, Sven, we can't include every barnacle and eaves trough in the Constitution of Canada.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't include it explicitly, but we did include it implicitly. And 3 years later, when Section 15 came into force, something very important happened. I went to see Brian Mulroney, who was the new prime minister at the time, and I said, Brian, you're going to appoint a committee to look at the impact of the Charter. What does it mean? What changes do we need? I said, but sexual orientation isn't there, but I have a bill to include sexual orientation in the Human Rights Act. And I'd like that committee to be able to examine my bill as well. Well, Brian said yes. And for the first time in Canadian history, an all-party parliamentary committee held hearings, televised hearings across the country to look at the impact of the Charter of Rights. 5 Conservatives, 1 Liberal, and me. And it was a transformational moment, to build on what you're asking me about, because those members of Parliament were genuinely moved by what they heard, including here, by the way, in Manitoba. 40 years ago, in May of 1985, we had hearings and some amazing witnesses that appeared. I just want to give a shout out to Chris Vogel and Rich North, who were trailblazers way back in the day, and so many others I could mention. That committee held hearings across the country. We heard the powerful evidence of Darrell Wood. We heard from one of the members of the Purge Fund board who was kicked out of the RCMP, Wayne Davis, who came to meet with our committee. And that evidence collectively moved that committee to the point where we said unanimously, end all discrimination based on sexual orientation and stop the purge in the military, the RCMP, and the public service. Well, it was like a bombshell in the Conservative caucus, as you can imagine. But once again, the government did respond, and most importantly, what they said is, we accept that Section 15 includes sexual orientation. And from that day forward, all lawsuits against the government of Canada were premised on the basis that our charter protected against discrimination based on sexual orientation. The last thing I want to say, so those were heroes, those were people who made a difference, but the homophobes were incredible. And for example, and I just close with this, just a couple of little examples of that homophobia that we were up against. Remember, this was the 80s, the pandemic of AIDS, the fear, the homophobia. I brought a motion before the House in '86 to support the recommendations of the committee. And a Conservative member of Parliament, Ron Stewart, said this is not an amendment on sexual orientation, this is an amendment on sexual deviation. Homosexual is anti-biological. It is anti-medical, anti-biblical, and I quote, "Go ye forth and multiply." It is anti-family and it is anti-social. It is pro-deviant and it is absolutely disgusting to most Canadians. That was unfortunately a common attitude. And the last one, and this is one of my favorites actually, and it's in the exhibit. And by the way, congratulations to everybody involved in this wonderful exhibit. There's reference made to this one as well. Conservative member of Parliament from Bow River in Alberta, who got up in the House, Gordon Taylor, and said, "Mr. Speaker, the New Democratic Party is urging the government to compel the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to accept lesbians and gays. Can you feature a fairy RCMP constable trying to arrest a lumberjack with a powder puff? Get this, can you imagine a lesbian RCMP fairy I don't know what that is, at the scene of an armed robbery, screaming, 'Stop, surrender, or I will hit you over the head with my purse.' If fairies were not hired, they would cry discrimination." The RCMP. This was the homophobia that we confronted, but we were able to overcome that thanks to the courage of people like Michelle, other trailblazers earlier on, like Bart Thornborough, Gloria Cameron, others who came later, Martin, Doug, and others. That made the difference, and it overcame that homophobia.
Thank you, Sven. Michaela, you're here representing our Rainbow Equity Council here at the museum. The Rainbow Equity Council got its start as a grassroots movement here at the museum. It was founded for a number of different reasons, but primarily pushing back against some of the censorship that was occurring of queer content here at the museum. It was a movement from within. It was around the time that work began with the Purge Fund on the exhibit. It was a difficult time for the museum, for the museum's employees, and many of the folks in this room, if not all, certainly remember the media coverage, remember the discussion. Going back a little bit to those days, because you're one of the co-founders of the Rainbow Equity Council, how important was it to have survivors, members of the Purge Fund to talk to be around, to support the Equity Council when there wasn't a blueprint for what you were doing at the time?
Yeah, I want to start by saying I am incredibly honored to be on this stage with all of you because the Rainbow Equity Council is built on the legacy of what Purge survivors and those who are no longer with us today were fought for. We at the museum are public servants, and we would not have been welcome in this institution or institutions like ours historically, if not for the folks I'm on this stage with. So I'm incredibly honored to be here. And I don't know if Michelle and Doug remember this, but early on into us forming the Rainbow Equity Council, we were given their cards. A member of the Rainbow Equity Council was given their cards and told, as we were talking about what we were starting and how everything had been going, they asked us some very honest questions about what was happening as they were working with the museum on rebuilding that relationship potentially, and had said, reach out if you are having any problems and we will have your back. And that has been a rallying cry in the Rainbow Equity Council to this day. When we were facing pushback, when things weren't working, when we met every single day for 3 months trying to figure out what we were building, that support and knowing that if we weren't able to achieve the things we were working for, that we had that community backing was immensely valuable to us. The Rainbow Equity Council started in September. We first met September 3rd of 2020. For context, the first Harris report came out in August of 2020. The Rainbow Equity Council, and I'm going to list some folks because I am part of an incredible community, and I would be remiss to not acknowledge that I am a co-founder and not a founder, and I would not have been able to at all have the courage to do any of this work without the folks who surrounded me. Scott DeGroot was a massive factor into that, alongside Rémi Courcelles, who is no longer with the museum, but truly was the driving force of the Rainbow Equity Council. Some other folks who helped found it were Françoise Uwa-Maria, Nicholas Catalano, Sandra Bender, Zachary Fortin, Rob Vincent, Brandon Leverick, and Blair Trelinsky. Those are the folks who helped create a community for us to make sure that we could be safe and we could be angry, because we were really angry. And it was really hard to come in during those times where the folks who helped found it were also folks who were harmed by being told that they had to censor themselves in this institution. And so when I think about the fact of how we had very little trust, there was a lot of work to build our own community in here, but it is truly built on the legacy and on the backs of all of the incredible survivors in this room.
Thank you, Mandela. Doug, congratulations on your Order of Canada. What an honor. Martin, you also have an Order of Canada. I think the hardest job for me was poring over all your bios and noting all the awards and wondering how I was going to weave them all in. What a decorated bunch. Definitely the group of warriors I want to take into any battle I need to fight. Thank you for your service for all of us here in this room. Doug, I've been at a few of your award ceremonies, but it's not really it's not what how I think of you when I've come to think of you over these years of doing this work together. I've had the privilege of seeing you socially with survivors and others that you've worked so closely with, and you can just see the love. And I remember one of them saying, "Doug's our rock. We couldn't have done this without Doug." So thank you for being a rock. But you're also a member of the community, and doing this work is hard, and it hits so close to home. How do you find your strength? And what does it mean to be here tonight and hitting this milestone?
Well, thank you for that, Reva. And I would just want to say what an honor it has been to work with you and the great team that you all, Matt and Scott and everyone that you've pulled together. And, it's one of the proud, I know the fund feels so proud of the transformative effect we've had on the museum's culture. It's one of the unexpected outcomes of our work. I was Scott talked about having the good fortune to be raised in a supportive family, and that's true for me as well. I come, like Michelle and Martine, I come from a family that was devoted to public service and putting others ahead of yourself. And those values have helped carry me forward, that sense of duty and service to other people. I come from a family with a long military and police tradition. I've also been very lucky to have great clients, who could ask for better clients than these two, right? Seriously, they're fantastic. And I've had wonderful colleagues. When you're rhyming off the list, I feel so remiss to, it becomes all about one person so often. And I was just the leader of an enormous team that was all my colleagues at Cambridge LLP, Joan Casozi, Scott Fairley, Tim Phelan, and then the other law firms that we worked with, and they're exceptional lawyers, Audrey Bochter, who is now Justice Audrey Bochter, just remarkable people, and that helps carry you because you cannot do it all by yourself. But there's no doubt that, it's hard to boil it down to one person, but if I had to boil it down to one person who has given me the strength to carry on, it would be my husband and my life partner of 49 years, Greg Long. Bless you.
Throughout tonight and throughout the exhibit and different speakers on the program, we've heard a lot about pride of service. And Martin, I want to talk to you a little bit about that because one of the things that I've come to know about you is just see that pride of service shine through. And in talking to other survivors and digging into the history, I think one of the things that surprised me from a civilian perspective, yes, a member of the public service, but not serving in the military, is that when we've often posed the question, would you go back? You're like, in a heartbeat. Shed some light on what is this pride of service that burns so strongly in survivors?
It's because we have to make a difference between when we were in the army, I really liked it. I really like all we had to do, and we were bigger than what we thought, we were stronger, and there was a team spirit and everything. So that nobody can take that away. And that was the part that was keeping us there, that was keeping us fighting and wanted more. And the fact that you're serving your country, that was so strong that for sure being fired for our sexual orientation made a cloud, but it could not take away that part. And I think this is what we're missing. When I say I would have wished they called me in 93 and say, come back, I would went back to the Army. And I'm going to say something. Maybe it's selfish, but we need an army. And we are responsible for it, okay? And it's what we give to the military. They're there to defend us. They're there to service us when there's flood, when there's all kind of thing. I'm proud of our military. And I'm proud that today we can be in reconciliation with them and that we can work with them because I want them to defend me. That's my selfish way.
Sven, my next observation is not going to surprise the audience as you brought your papers in. So when I met you in the context of this role and you arrived at the museum for a Purge Advisory Council meeting, you had papers all over the place, this big file, and they were spilling out, and you were very excited because you had been heavily involved. One of the aspects of the whole settlement was access to documents and survivors having access to their files, many who've never seen what had been written about them or the documents available. You were doing the heavy lifting, sifting through the documents. You faced some opposition. Even though the settlement gave access to the documents, you still had to fight. You still had to push.
Yep.
To me, that's a bit of a metaphor, right? For the whole journey, it was always triumph, resistance, never a straight line, never a linear path. How do you find the energy to fight those fights for so long and at such an intricate level?
Well, it's a labor of love, really.
Yeah.
I feel incredibly privileged to have been trusted by the board of the Purge Fund to write the history, an updated history, because of course Gary and Patricia did a very important work in 2010. And now to update that history, to tell the story is an incredible privilege. And you're right, I've been immersed in documents at the archives. I've had the privilege of interviewing people from prime ministers, 3 former prime ministers, survivors, looking at documents and so on. It's been an extraordinary experience. We had some significant challenges along the way from our friends in the Department of Justice, trying to access key documents and being told, no, that's solicitor-client privilege. The Department of Justice, by the way, was the only federal government department that refused to allow itself to be examined and its own record during the purge to be examined, which is most unfortunate as well. But no, it's been a great experience. The other, I think, extraordinary thing, as I've viewed the documents, if I can just bootleg this in as well, because it's an important part of the history, Briva, is the extent to which the purge was orchestrated at the highest levels. Highest levels of the bureaucracy, highest levels of the government, right to the top. Prime Minister Lester Pearson was well aware of and overseeing the interrogation of former Ambassador John Watkins, who died while he was being interrogated by the RCMP. The Fruit Machine project was overseen by the 4 key public servants. And I've got minutes of a meeting on the Fruit Machine, if I can just quickly, one of my documents, a meeting of what's called the security panel. And this, I mean, who was this? It was the elite. It was the clerk of the Privy Council, the head of the Department of External Affairs, the commissioner of the RCMP, and the head of the Civil Service Commission, talking about we need this device or this mechanism. But what was also most shocking was at the end, they admitted that they knew that this was wrong. And so what did they say? They said, we have to come up, and this was from the minutes of the meeting, we have to come up with a satisfactory cover story on this issue, a cover story. And the cover story they came up with was that to avoid embarrassing questions, it might be explained in terms of a current program of testing immigrants in order to detect psychopaths. So at the highest levels, Riva, the documents make it very clear this was orchestrated by senior bureaucrats, by senior politicians, not just by a group of rogue RCMP officers. And that's part of the story that must be told as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Sven. And just for the record, we did not discuss discussing documents here today. So I I just had a feeling. I had a feeling. Michelle, it's been an incredible journey to come to this point. In your role as executive director of the Purge Fund, you've been able to work on various initiatives, including the exhibit. You've been awarded with an honorary colonel designation, super important to you, I know. And how important has been this part of the journey to that restitution and taking you to a new place in this process?
Yeah, I think it's the most important part of the journey, the healing part, the part where survivors have actually come together, become friends, shared our stories, and just felt like an enlarged family who really have a common experience, even though individually we may have gone through different journeys. So I think it's the most important part, and we're telling our stories. It's so critical that people hear the range of experiences because it is the one thing we never want to see repeated. Now it's our mission to come together, to do the work, to find love in a dangerous time. And to do this work, you have to be together. You cannot be divided when many would like to see that happen. It's important for our young people, for the amazing youth of this country and beyond. It is important for us to uphold those values, and you only really do that together. So I think it's the most important time. It's the greatest honor that we have to come to a place like the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, to be in a trusted relationship, to share the stories that are so hard to tell, but so essential to share. So now is the time to do the work, to go forward in strength together as friends, as people who have walked the path, to gather people in and to say, let's not go back to that. It was a terrible time. Let's learn the history and look for a brighter future.
Thank you. Michaela, you and the members of the Rainbow Equity Council have been on a journey as well, and the Equity Council is now a part of our workplace culture. I'm proud to be a member. Myself and a number of other executives of our current team are members of the Rainbow Equity Council for the first time in the history of the council. It was work to get to that place that we're proud of, and we know we have more work to do. The Rainbow Equity Council is recognized and honored in the exhibit for its work and its contribution to workplace change. What did that mean to you and members of REC to see that panel there in the exhibit and as a recognition, a restitution of sorts? Tell us about how that felt that day.
So we got some training documents in advance that had all of the text of the exhibit, and I was sitting with one of the other co-founders, reading through it, and all of a sudden I stopped and started crying, and was immediately overwhelmed. I showed it to the other co-founder. They all just stopped and started crying, and I immediately messaged Scott to say thank you, because it meant a huge deal. The Rainbow Equity Council had some rocky starts in the beginning. Me and Reba were maybe talking about this earlier today, where in our first meeting, we came in having spent months working on these terms of references, and we also created a document called Recommendations and Demands. And it was 6 overarching recommendations and demands with subcategories to create a safer workplace for queer and trans folks. And when we came in, we were coming in really raw. I don't know how any of you were doing in early 2021, but the pandemic had really also taken a toll, and we were also going through all of this upheaval in our workplace at the same time. And so we came in and we had a whole conversation about using the term demand. And ultimately, the place that we had landed was that we wanted to root ourselves in our history and the fact of we demand being a critical point in queer Canadian history. Sure. And so we brought that forward, and we ended up having a bit more of a conversation about the words that we were using than the context of, or the actual substance of what we were trying to get to. And that was not a great start, and we felt really pushed back on and not like very welcome. And I will say that truly Reba is correct. The fact that Reba and other vice presidents who at the time when we first wrote those documents were not welcome because we did not have trust, are now welcome, and that is in the exhibit. It felt like there was a bit of an acknowledgement, an actual acknowledgement of the harm that was caused to queer and trans staff. Folks left, folks who weren't here to see this through, and a recognition that we are trying to create that no one in the rec ever does anything in this institution because they don't care. It is because they care very deeply about what this place could be and what this place can be for our community. And this is an incredible privilege to be honored alongside you all in that exhibit for that work.
We are running over time, as we knew we would, as we were determined not to, but we've not lived up to our mission. I'm going to use a little executive privilege here to carry us on a little longer, and because we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the things that are happening in the world today, and some of the things we've been talking about over the last 2 or 3 days in particular. Doug, every morning I read the paper and I think, Doug's never going to be able to retire. And I had such high hopes. I thought, we might ride out together on the.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish we're living in a dangerous time again, especially in the United States, where not just our community is under attack, but democracy is under attack. The very concept of human rights is under attack. That a kind of white supremacy and praise of toxic masculinity is back in vogue in a way that I would have thought impossible a few years ago. It's very, very troubling. Who would have thought that, for the first couple of 100 years of Canada's existence, we were frequently invaded by the United States, but all through the 20th century, that was unthinkable. And now annexation by the United States is being openly discussed by the President of the United States, who wants to impose his vision on our country. It's shocking and a little scary. But I've got to tell you, when you look at this exhibit, what I want you to take away from it, it ends with that wonderful word, victory. And we are resilient people. We are tough people. Canadians defeated Adolf Hitler and his Nazis. The Nazis are back, and we're going to beat them again. We just have to stick together. And Canadians are great people. We're decent people. We believe in fairness, and we believe in sticking together. But we're not afraid to fight. You're looking at people here who have fought to get what we have. What we have today for our community wasn't gifted to us by Prime Minister Mulroney or Pierre Trudeau. Spend had to fight for it. Martine had to fight for it. Michaela had to fight for it here. We all had to fight for it. And guess what, folks? We have to fight for it again. And I'm getting old and tired, but I'm here to tell you I have not hung up my suit of armor yet. And there's a wonderful generation of younger lawyers like Adam Goldenberg and Daniel Gerlando and younger activists who are prepared to take up the torch. And I think this is a great opportunity for intergenerational learning. And I'm going to put in a shameless plug that we're right now working on a symposium for October called the Ruby Sachs Symposium. We're going to bring together lawyers from all over the world who are working to defend the human rights of queer people, but the human rights of all people. And we're going to fight back.
Martin, your battleground really became the workplace as you moved through your career as one of the founders of Pride at Work, working on diversity issues and equity issues in a number of different workplaces over decades. Why did the workplace become so important as a place to seek change? And how are you reconciling that with some of the steps back as you see employers abandoning diversity initiatives? How difficult is this work going to be in the next phase?
That's the thing I don't understand, because the workplace is where you want to be productive, you want to be focused, and to be like that, you have to be authentic. So if I'm your boss, I want you to be productive and focused, and I want you to want to go to work the next day, so I want you to be authentic. And that's like, it's not like a good thing to do. It is the thing to do for both sides, even for the company, for the corporation. So I know that DEI is the word, and I think we have to stop using it. We just have to use, what makes sense here is in the workplace. It's not the place where you should be looked at as a woman first. I'm a woman first. I enter the room. Am I equal? I'm not equal yet. I still have to work for that, even in the workplace. And then after they're all the 2S LGBTQ. And I find that at the end of the day, the workplace is where everything happens, because everybody has to work. So what happened at that workplace goes to home. And what happened at home then goes back to the field and goes to the kids. It's crucial. And that's why we founded Pride at Work Canada, to do desk by desk by desk and convince people to say, hey, it's not just a good thing, it's the right thing to do, to be inclusive in the workplace and to be focused and productive and want to go to work and, build that culture. So for me, it's my whole life. I always believed that, and I still believe on it today. And it drives me it's like they're going to realize that. Because by doing what they're doing right now, they're going to lose talent. They're not going to attract any. It's not going to be a good culture of workplace. People are not going to be happy to work in that place. So it's not going to be good for them. It's going to turn around on people. So for me, it's very important, and it's important, like Pride at Work is very important, that the work they do to go offices by offices and take the time to train the people and make them understand how important it is, equity, inclusion, and to be diversified. But we have to say the whole word. Like that, the DEI, they can.
Michaela, you, through your work with Pride at Work and others, you're in touch with equity councils at other workplaces across the country. What kinds of things are you hearing from your colleagues out there doing this work? How things have changed just so much in recent times? What kind of things are people talking about and facing right now?
So when I did the Flourish course with Pride at Work, which is a ERG leadership course, employee resource group leadership course, I made quite a few friends from across the country who were leading their own equity councils, and they have shared with me some of the setbacks that they have been seeing in recent months. A lot of suddenly having larger budgets to do Pride events, to do year-round events, just slowly receding, things where Suddenly, when they were being resourced to do that work, they're now doing it much more from the side of their desk, those types of things. And so we're definitely seeing that shift. But there's also a lot more folks who I would say are like us, who we shared in that course. We shared our founding documents with many different folks who weren't at the stage of starting a resource group. And the folks who I took it with, we were all sharing our founding documents, trying to share that knowledge, being there for each other to be able to create that. So there's definitely a shifting tide, but if you'll indulge me, I actually have a quote from Rémi, because Rémi was the very brave individual who on August 14th, 2020, sent an email out to all staff asking who would be interested in joining the Equity Council, and he ended it with this: "Time and again, our community has faced hardships. This has happened here at our workplace, but also happens every single day in the world outside. My hope is that by working together, we can build a museum that is queer from the inside and out, and one that leads by example in transforming the society around us." And truly, I think that REC and my colleagues in REC, who I would like to just take a hot second, if there are folks who are part of REC, to just wave or stand so you can take a moment, because I am not the only person who represents REC. But I truly think that those colleagues, the folks here, everyone in this room tonight is part of the people who are making sure that our diversity, equity, and inclusion in our workplaces is not something that can crumble in a week. If it crumbles in a week, it didn't mean anything. If it can be sustainable through this time, that is when we know that our institutions are taking it seriously and they understand everything that Marcin just said.
Thank you. All right, we're down to two last questions. Sven, when I was thinking about getting to know you and reflecting on one of the things we share in common is we both worked in politics at a time when it just felt so much more civil. I am so distressed at the level of polarization, at the extremism we're seeing, and it's driving people away from politics at a time when we need good people in politics. It's impacting the public service. It's these houses are being harmed. What can we do to turn this around?
Well,
I gave you the hard question. I know.
I wish
I
I
know.
had an easy answer. You're right. I mean, it's toxic now. I mean, it really is. Let me just say, though, how great it is to be in Manitoba with an Indigenous Premier, Rob Canoe, and a group of amazing LGBT members of the legislature as well. Shout out to them. So, I mean, there are spots of sunshine, but overall, it is a very toxic environment. And when we look at who's targeted, when, diversity, equity, inclusion, who's affected by that? It's people with disabilities, it's racialized people, it's Indigenous people, it's women, who, by the way, all of whom were even more harshly affected by the purge, as we know. I mean, women weren't even allowed to join the RCMP until 1974, and we've seen a series of class action lawsuits. So I think more than ever, it's a time for solidarity. It's a time for solidarity. It's a time to recognize that more than anything else, I think, particularly in the States, it's trans people that are on the front lines, and we bloody well better be warriors to defend trans people every single step of the way. And I just want to mention as well that one of those amazing trans survivors from the late 1970s, if you can believe it, who transitioned out, is with us tonight. Erin is here tonight, and one of those survivors who I just want to give a shout out to as well. Not an easy time. And just two other brief points. Love in a dangerous time, yes, but not enough. It was not just love that they were after. It's love and desire in a dangerous time. It's love and lust in a dangerous time. They're after our sexuality, not just our love. And we have to fight back against that as well and recognize that most of the purge survivors were purged not because of who they loved, but because who they had sex with. And that history is very important. And the last thing, yeah. And the last thing is this, and it builds on what Doug was saying. Doug talked about the Nazis, and he's right. This week was the week of International Holocaust Remembrance. I hope many of you saw the incredibly powerful images from Auschwitz. I've been there. It's a painful and agonizing experience. And in this week, as we commemorate the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, I would just want to leave you with the words of a survivor, 99-year-old survivor, Leon Weintraub, because I think they're apposite for us today and in response to your question, Riva. He said this, he said, "Let's take seriously what the enemies of democracy preach. We survivors of the Holocaust, pink triangles, yellow stars, understand that the consequences of being different is active persecution, which we have personally experienced. We must avoid the mistakes of the 1930s. Memory hurts, memory helps, memory guides, memory warns. This exhibit is about memory, and I thank you for keeping that memory alive and for the resistance that I hope it will provoke."
And with that profound quote, thank you, Sven, for sharing during this incredible week. We are going to call ourselves to a close. We thank you for your indulgence. It is very difficult to have such a distinguished group and not go on for quite a long time. So thank you for your indulgence. Thank you, panelists, for sharing your experiences.
How do I follow that? I want to start by thanking Riva Harrison for moderating the panel, but also for pouring your heart and soul in caring for the survivors throughout this process. So thank you so much, Riva. Let's give her a hand of applause. And for me, what we're hearing tonight also resonates to me personally. As a queer person, to me, their stories really makes me reflect on the privilege that I have today and the sacrifices and hard work that the survivors put in to put me in a position to be here today, to be out and proud at work. So thank you so much to the survivors for everything that you've done. Thank you. Let's give you a round of applause. And as Doug mentioned, when I first heard of the Purge, I thought this could never happen today. There's no way. And you fast forward to this week, and you can feel we're at the precipice of another dangerous time. And so this exhibit, Love in Dangerous Time, is more timely than ever. It's more timely for us to learn from the past, to support each other, and to take action in our communities. So please visit the exhibit, bring your friends, tell your stories, learn the lessons from the past, and please, let's protect each other, love each other, and take the next steps for the next generation that needs our support. Thank you very much.